Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Trade Stock. I got a special guest in the studio with me today. One of the first disruptors to join the disruptor group. Actually, I looked at this. He joined December 3rd in 2024, the few days after we even opened up the disruptors for our pre-launch. One of our founding members and a dear friend of mine, someone who has established an amazing name in the landscape industry in the San Diego market, Mr. Andrew Martin of Urban Landscapes. Andrew, welcome to the podcast, my man.
Hey, thanks, Justin. I appreciate you having me here and definitely appreciate everything you've done for the Disruptors community and putting that together and getting a great group of guys and gals to share and be part of a community.
Yeah, man, it's been a journey. We're coming up, like I said, December 3rd, you joined, which is less than 2 months away as from a year, which is kind of crazy to think about. Back to you. I appreciate all the involvement and contributions and just coming to the weekly calls too. You're always giving us some insight to think about, and it helps round the group off when we have people from, Pennsylvania and Texas and New York and all over the country. And of course here in California, sharing those insights on a week to week basis for me has been huge, of like being on top of the trends in the landscape industry. I don't know about you, but that's been one of
Yeah, for
my
sure.
favorite things.
Yeah, I think we obviously with, you got snow and markets and things like that are different, but overall I think we all share some of the same struggles as individuals and business owners, and it's cool that you can just have raw conversations and people seem to really open up. And it was great to also come visit you guys up in Santa Cruz and get to know your team at the event you hosted. And I look forward to another one and connecting with you guys also again at Elevate this year.
Yeah, man. Elevate's going to be a blast. I'm really looking forward to Elevate this year. I'm glad you're
Yeah, it was
coming.
fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll be there for sure. It's close enough that we can drive, but maybe not worth the flight. So we'll
Yeah.
be there for a few days, and I look forward to that.
Yeah, man. I'm doing a talk on how to be a disruptive successor. And so I've been planning and prepping for that PowerPoint, and it's been super fun to build because basically what I'm trying to create is this idea of what the future of landscape's going to look like in 5 years. Oh my God. Who knows? I mean, we've got robotics, we've got automation, we have some really smart people coming into our industry. So anyway, the next 5 years are going to be crazy. I'm excited for it.
Is it is that talk going to be kind of based off of the book that you shared with the group? I did read that, and I got some great insights from that book. Is it similar to that?
Yeah. So my coach, Jonathan Goldhill, for those listening, he wrote a book called The Disruptive Successor. And in a lot of ways, it's the journey of K&D. It's a journey of myself, my brother, my second generation family taking over from our parents and building this company up. And so I've taken some of those principles from that book. And he wrote that, I think, in 2021, I want to say, or 2020. So I've kind of taken those principles and fundamentals and then built on top of those for the talk, specifically about what's going on today. Obviously, AI is a big disruptive technology, but it's in itself isn't disruptive. It's how you use it that can be disruptive. But what's interesting about disruption is sometimes just being radically different leads to a massive advantage in your marketplace. And so for me, being disruptive isn't so much about coming up with the next biggest thing. It's just being different than everybody else and seeing if you can make that work. Because if you can, then
Sure.
you have a differentiator, which is hard to find.
Right. Right. Well, I look forward to that talk. I'll be there, and I'm bringing our director of maintenance, and I told him to run his own schedule that day, but your speech and a few other words, I said, these are must sit-ins, so we'll be there together. I look forward to that.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Yeah, I'm bringing some team members too. We'll have to get all of our teams together so they can network. And on that note, let's dive in a little bit to Urban Landscape and the Andrew Martin story. I think I wanted to have you on the podcast because you have a very unique story. So many people I ask how you get started, they're like, oh, I started pushing a lawnmower when I was 15, and next thing you know, I got 20 employees. You have a very different story, and I want to start from the beginning when you were in school and you started talking with trades professionals. Your dad was smart enough to give you that leadership and that guidance to go and network with people, which you've carried through to today. And you started talking to people like landscapers back in the day, and you started to understand the trades from a completely different perspective than most. Maybe we pick it up there and talk a little
Sure.
bit about what that was like when you were a youngster talking to some of these maybe more salty construction trade professionals.
Absolutely. So, Urban Landcare was established third quarter 2018, but there was a whole chapter or chapters of my life leading up to that to get me where I am today. My dad always says it takes a day in a lifetime to build a company, or to do anything. So, my dad was a landscape or a construction guy, build houses, developed some land in northern Kentucky, Ohio area. So I was always in helping him, putting up signs, gopher, cleaning up the construction sites, sweeping the floors. So he was always, putting me around those guys, and I always liked the trades, I always liked the hard work, and the before and after. It was the visual to me was always a cool thing. Once I kind of took a liking to landscape specific and horticulture, he knew a lot of guys, and he would be like, "Hey, well, go talk to this guy or that guy." So I started kind of interviewing owners like yourself, and just, would sit down, we meet at coffee or breakfast, and some of them I'd meet one time, some of them I'd meet, more than once. I took a liking to an older nurseryman. This guy, by the time I hooked up with him, was probably like in his 80s, and he grew all his own plants, had a very unique kind of growing system, and then he did residential install for new home builders. So at one point I was selling plants for him as like a side hustle, and kind of took me under his wing. And this was when I was going to horticultural school. So, that led on for years of meeting different people. And, I learned what not to do and what to do from a lot of these guys. A lot of them seemed very unhealthy, burnout, divorce, heart issues, didn't take care of themselves. So I kind of took the opposite approach of that. I was always real big on, exercising, eating right, doing whatever I could to feel good physically, mentally. Um, and that just kind of led into I went to college, and in summers of high school and college, I was doing landscaping,
Yeah.
working for kind of like the smaller companies, the up and comers, and that was cool. And then, I ended up at University of Kentucky, and that's where I got my bachelor's in business. So I knew I wanted to be a businessman. I knew I wanted to eventually I had that entrepreneur spirit. And, you know, after I graduated, I was like, well, I had some interviews, and I'm like, I don't want to sit at a desk and do marketing. Sounds boring. I've been outside for the last, 5, 10 years. So I ended up going back to school, to a trade school, and I got a degree in landscape horticulture technologies. The technology back then was a lot different than now. We were physically drawing our plans
Oh
and
yeah.
stuff like that. But I like that because I have a background of being an artist, so I like the hands-on approach of things like that. Um, but during that time, I started a little company, and that kind of led me to the entrepreneur path. And I was still talking to different guys and about, that own companies, and learning from them. And I got to a point where I had to really invest in the business in Ohio, or kind of make a move to get like some real experience. And that's when I got connected with Valley Crest, and I was coming to San Diego for vacation. I met them at like a trade show where I got a scholarship, and they had some representatives there from Valley Crest, and I was like, well, I'm going to California next week for vacation. They're like, we should hook up with the San Diego guys. They're a good group. And
Yeah.
so, long story short, I had some interviews with those guys, and they took me to lunch, and they're like, why don't you just come out here? And I was like, wow, okay. So I was in my young 20s. So that's when I made the shift to
Wow.
to move out to San Diego.
Oh, that's wild. I didn't even know that. So you ended up going out to San Diego for vacation, met the Valley Crest guys, offered you a
Yeah.
job. Next thing you know, you're moving to San Diego.
Yeah, it was the Valley Crest Landscape Development guys,
Oh
Vince
yeah.
Gurman and Brendan McFadden, who are some pretty big legends with the Valley Crest team. And San Diego had a good market. They had maintenance and construction down here. So I started with the development side, and then I wanted to be outside. I wanted to see the plants. I just didn't want to look at the blueprints and count how many 24-inch box trees are going to be installed at this campus and all that. So I eventually made the switch to maintenance. And when I did that, they were really respectful about it, but they just said, think about which path you want, construction or maintenance. It's very hard to do both. Like at K&D, you're not going to have a guy that is an operation manager for both divisions. You're kind
Oh
of
yeah,
specialized in one or the other, right? So I chose the maintenance path, and it's been good to me.
nice. And was there anything when you were going through that decision of going from development to maintenance that pulled you to maintenance that you enjoyed about maintenance more, or was it more just kind of the luck of the draw at that point?
Well, I think growing up, I was always cleaning up properties, maintaining properties, plant propagation. I like the horticulture side of things. So I
Yep.
liked, like, if you drop me off at a resort in Hawaii, my eyes are gonna, scale. I'm gonna see the whole thing and the deficiencies and where we can do improvements. And, it's like when I go to the San Diego Zoo with my family, my youngest is always like, "Why are you like plants so much, Dad? Why are you talking about plants all the time?" It's just in my DNA, I guess. So
Yeah.
um, that's, I guess I'm better at maintaining things than building them. But we do both at Urban. But that was just kind of my passion was I guess the gardening and horticulture side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're doing construction on that scale too, that Valley Crest was doing it back then. I mean, like you said, you're installing thousands of plants, and it's a production line. It's not there's not a lot of horticulture going in to a large commercial installation. If anything, plants are only about 20% of the job. The other 80% the soil prep, the trees, the site furnishings, all the other stuff, or should I say the
Yeah, like
irrigation?
the site furnishings, that definitely didn't interest me. Like, yeah, go get
No.
a quote on 20 garbage cans and,
Yeah.
benches and yeah, exactly. But the design, landscape design too, being able to be creative about it.
Mhm.
When you're doing a blueprint, it's pretty much like, hey, this is what it's going to be. Um, and I like to have a little bit of say in that. So enhancements has been great for me. We do a lot of big enhancements. Some of them could be, size of a construction project.
No,
So
yeah, seriously. And
yeah.
and so you decided to you're working at these bigger companies, and you decide at some point around 2018, it sounds like, to go out and start your own business, Urban Landcare. Where was the initial, seed planted that you wanted to go out and start your own business? I think there's a lot of people out there who listen to this podcast who either have started or are thinking maybe about starting their own company one day. So
Yeah,
I want to dig
I'd
into that.
say let's do it. I think that it's never too late. I did it if you read a book about it, I probably did it the way that you shouldn't do it. I had two young kids. I had just been married. I hadn't even owned a house yet. I worked for the two companies that form Brightview, Brickman and Valley Crest. I worked for some large family-owned companies. And at the end, I was working for a company in San Diego, and I was the VP. I was doing a lot of work, and I was doing everything, most things that an owner, in my mind, would be doing. And I just thought it's time, like, let's give it a shot. It was always kind of why I got into landscaping. The company I had when I was in Cincinnati was, very small scale. I didn't even have any employees, just kind
Yeah.
of some, side thing, but. Yeah, I just thought, hey, now or never. Let's give it a shot. It was a big risk, though. I took our family life savings. I knew I needed revenue. I didn't want to be the guy out there driving the truck like day one. So I seeked out a very small acquisition. I knew I wanted to do commercial landscape maintenance, and had a friend that had two residential routes, but he was kind of gearing towards the residential kind of design build. So we worked a deal where he sold me a route. It
Nice.
came with a truck, two employees, and I don't know, like 15 houses, mainly in like Rancho Santa Fe, La Jolla, which are pretty high end, affluent parts of San Diego. Well, that's how I got the seed planted, and then I ended up removing those houses and replacing them with commercial. But it came with its challenges. The funny story about getting it off the ground was we had two employees. When I went up to meet them, one of them was like, "I'm not working for you. I don't know you. I quit."
Oh,
This was like
right
a
off the
week
bat.
week before, right off the bat. It's like a week before we were going to start operating. Luckily, the driver didn't quit, and he was like, "Well, I'm going to bring two guys." And I was like, "Oh man, I'm not even paying myself. How am I going to afford two guys?" But luckily, I closed a deal right away, and I got an HOA. So I dropped a couple
Nice.
houses. We brought on the HOA, and then that kind of, continued to get more properties, more commercial properties. But it was scary, and for the first few years, it was questionable, if we were going to be, you know, in it long term. So there
I
was a lot
bet.
of ups and downs, but we just kept moving forward.
What was it like? I mean, when you decided to make the jump and you went from, W-2 employee, getting your paycheck every week, to being an owner, and you envisioned what it was going to be like. You thought about what it was going to be like. How different was it when you actually did that jump and you started to run a business? Was it easier or harder than you thought it was going to be? And what were some of the things that maybe you didn't expect that you ran into in that first year?
Well, I thought I was going to get paid right away. That didn't happen. I envisioned being I was always a guy managing, always, but later on in my career, managing a group of account managers or a large region or a branch or whatever. And I started off just with two or three guys, and I had to have the nozzle box in my truck. I'm pretty lousy irrigator, but I did it. I had the parts in my truck, and I couldn't pay myself probably for the first 3 months, and then it was just like $20 an hour or whatever we could afford. So there was that side of it, and then I guess the timing. I didn't really from day one. Maybe I should have had like a 5-year plan day one. I guess I would encourage some
Okay.
the younger guys to maybe and gals to maybe think of that. I was just like focused on day to day and closing out the year. But it took a while to get to that point where we need an operations manager, we need an account manager, but we just continued the path and believed in ourselves and believed in our company and our values, and we slowly grew to be able to make that next hire. Like I remember it was a really big deal when we got an irrigator. And
Yeah.
my guys like, we can't do all these extras, the maintenance guys. And this was like, 6 months in. They're like, you need an extras guy. And it was like a big deal to buy a truck and just have a guy that you necessarily didn't have a backlog for. But it worked out. The more maintenance you get, the more enhancements, right? You know this, the more irrigation,
Yeah.
and we have a pretty strong penetration rate on that. And that's one of our big focuses. So we were able to just continue to grow that. But to answer your question about what was it like, I would say it was a little bit different than what I anticipated. But I guess in the end, we got where we wanted to be.
And that's great. I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, I think a lot of people don't think about that first year where it is you don't have an irrigation tech, you don't have the account manager, you don't have the mechanic for the shop and all the tools. And coming from a company like a Valley Crest sort, you have such great systems and back end support. You go into running your own business, like it's all you, but at least it's all you from a positive perspective too, right? You're doing this for your small group, your employees, and your brand now.
Your
So
brand, your family. Yeah. And my
yeah,
dad used to say like he was a little discouraging early on to do my own thing. And I think that kind of got my ear, and I did start working for these large firms, mainly because he was like, when you're in trades, and I saw him doing it growing up, and you probably saw your parents the same way. It's like you're out in the field all day, and after 4 o'clock, you're not just like watching TV or working out or hanging out. You're actually back in the office,
yeah,
and that was the days. I mean, I still have days like that, but for the first 5 years, it was the 12-hour days. It was the 6 7 days a week, holidays, whatever it took to get everything done. But you go out all day, it's hot, and then you come home and you got to crank out the emails and the invoices and cash the checks but I did from early on, I did have a bookkeeper, and I did have a really good CPA, and those are things that
nice.
I would really encourage someone to do. And also a fractional CFO. Those are things that I wish I would have had that guy earlier, but we have a fractional CFO now who that was encouraged by some mentors of mine, and I think it really changed your perspective on things as an owner.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, having the right people in your corner, and today you can get great bookkeepers for pretty inexpensive just due to the internet economy we have.
Sure.
Now, where did you go from there? You mentioned you kind of you've got it to where at least you wanted to be short term here, 7 years in. What's kind of the makeup of your company today? You do construction, you do maintenance. What's your team look like? You're still in San Diego, right? That's where you're operating. Maybe give us a little update on where things are at Urban today.
Absolutely. So we have 30 plus employees. We are in the 3 to 5 million a year revenue, and we are specifically in the San Diego region. We do commercial landscape maintenance and enhancements in irrigation. Like I said, we have a pretty strong penetration rate, and real heavy on the irrigation side.
Yeah.
So probably half of the monthly dollar we do in enhancements is irrigation. We have a really strong irrigation department. So that being said, geographically, we go from the border of San Diego to North County, San Diego. And a little struggle with that is with this market, it's you can't grow west and you can't grow south. So
Definitely
with
can't
San
go
Diego,
west.
you
That is
can't go west. You can't go west.
and
And
what's south
for now,
for
for
everyone else who doesn't know.
yeah, for now we can't go south. We got Mexico right there. But we do now. I just picked up a large portfolio that's literally like you can see the border, which is pretty wild.
That is kind of a
Um,
trip. People forget about how close San Diego is to the border. It's literally you're on the border.
you're on the border.
It's a border
It
town.
is crazy. And you know, a lot of companies from LA try to come down here. Some make it, some don't.
Right.
It's like they say it's like an island, San Diego. Like it's close, but it's like it's too close. It's too you can't fly, and it's a pretty long drive. So like, it's tough. It's a tough market, but for now we're trying to really grow out this region. If we were ever to grow out of San Diego, the next step would be like Inland Empire, Orange County. But San Diego is so big. Like when I worked for Brickman, they had, gosh, at least a half a dozen branches just here. So you could
Wow.
have a very
Yeah.
large I mean, there's companies that just do San Diego that do 25, million a year.
Yeah.
So I think that's our plan for now is just to really dominate this market. You have a lot of PE companies here and you have a lot of regional companies. So you can have a pretty good sized company here. A lot of those regional companies are, at the age where they're, maybe approaching retirement or they're selling off to PE. So
Yeah.
we're kind of that next generation of landscape companies and owners that are, here to stay.
Oh, I love that so much. So let's talk about
Disruptors,
the disruptors.
right?
That's it, man. That's
Yeah,
what we're doing, and it's exciting because, like you said, there's a huge chunk of business owners who are retiring, who are going on to live their next life. And what's really cool is, in a positive note, private equity's given them the ability to create generational wealth and retire with enough money to actually retire, where they put all this sweat equity into their business, and hopefully one day they were able to sell it, and now they are able to sell it. There's guys who've just worked their whole life and they're exiting for 20, 30, 40 million dollars, which I think 20 years ago that would have been just totally not in the plan. So
they
of
deserve
course,
it too,
I
right?
agree. They've worked so hard. And so that in lies an opportunity, though, because not everybody that is employed by that family owner, that founder, if you will, wants to continue into that next step of working and being a part of a larger consolidation platform, like a private equity backed group, if you will, or a large strategic company. And I think people who grew up with a founder like yourself, like myself, like, my dad, they want to keep working for someone like us, frankly. They want to be able to see the CEO in the office. They want to be able to, hang out on the weekends, maybe even with people they really care and love, and they have that connection with. And so I think that in lies the opportunity, because not everybody's going to follow them to that consolidation path. And those really great employees are looking for a home. And the same thing on the customer side. Not every customer wants to be one of 10,000. Some customers want to be one of 10 or one of 100, and
We hear that a
really
lot.
they like that. So
We hear
tell
that a
me,
lot in the bid
yeah,
process.
you and I have some similarities in that, right? I'm in this Bay Area market. You're in the San Diego market. We can probably between the two of us, we can probably throw a stone at at least 10 of the top 20 landscape companies in the country from where we are, at least one of their
Absolutely.
branches. What is it like for you guys competing against some of these larger strategic and private equity backed companies in the San Diego market? How do you compete with these, behemoths?
Well, I'd say we do compete with them. Like I went on a bid walk recently and it was Urban and it was three national companies
Yeah.
in Urban, right?
Yeah.
And
So it's four companies. Three are
yep,
national, like giant, and we probably can all think of the names we're talking about, probably top fives.
sure.
And
Top
and then
fives.
and then here we are, startup, if you will, 7 years into the game,
Sure.
and here you are with them playing with the big boys. How'd that feel? First off,
Absolutely.
how'd that feel?
It felt great. And even if we didn't get the job, I tell my director of maintenance, John, I say, hey, like this is where we're going. This is exciting that we even have the ability to be there 7 years in. Some other regional companies that do maybe 20 million a year, they're not there, right? So we're there.
Yeah.
So San Diego is a little bit challenging. I told you the geographic challenges from a competitive standpoint. Um, top of my head, I can think of six companies on the top 150 list for lawn and landscape, and probably at least in the top 10, there's probably at least five.
Yeah. Wow.
And those guys reach out to us, for conversations. We're
Yep.
friendly with a lot of them. One of the CEOs is a friend of mine. And also there's companies that want to get in this market, and they contact us. And it's just I think it's a green city, meaning that there's year-round landscaping here. You can Gantt down in your maintenance, but if you're a good company, you're just going to sell more work and keep those employees, right? So
Exactly.
to answer your question, yes, there's a lot of private equity. There's a lot of national companies. Um, we compete with them. They have things that we don't. We have things that they don't. I think what we hear a lot in the bid process is either their prices spike because they have to meet their margins for their investors. That's one part of it. And the opposite is some of them low bid. Some of the
Yeah.
ones in maybe the top five, they make money on scale, right?
Right.
So they're doing, $1 billion. Like they can bid prices that are, expired in my mind, right? So it makes it a little bit tough. The I've had some conversations with some disruptors, in our group, and when I talk to them about what other companies are bidding and where they're at, maybe up in your area, they're like, "What? Like, how do they get away with that?" And I'm like, "I don't know, but it's screwing up the market."
Yeah. Yeah. As far as like
But
pricing so low.
as far as, yeah, specifically talking about pricing, but what we can offer that they can't is more touches, better
Hmm.
communication, consistent management. I do have account managers now, but I still am involved. I do still visit my properties as much as I can. I do punch lists from time to time. A coach or mentor may say, "Why are you doing that?" And I'm doing it for retention because I'm in the area because it's what I'm
Smart.
passionate about, right? And me, Andrew specifically, but also Urban, we're very big on quality, and I put our quality up against a lot of big companies, any day. So those are the main things I think is response time quality and relationship building. I've always been really big on relationships with my employees and my clients. I think that that's what's carried me through success in this industry. And I think that's where we can compete with these big dogs is, you know, we care. Not that they don't, but we are going to deliver um, a relationship that as a property manager, it's happened to me so many times. Say that big job that I went to where it was the four companies, three nationals and urban. That manager, say we didn't get the job, but that manager, property manager, went to another company a year later it's pretty likely that they're going to think of us again and they're going to give
Yeah.
us another shot. And that's how, like, I have like a very typical for me to bid a job, win it. The property manager leaves, as you know, there's a high turnover. They leave within a year. They go to another company and bring me onto another property. So I have that property and I kept the old property. So I could be working with a manager that I have like five properties with, but it's
Three
their
different
past
management
life.
companies.
Yeah, and like and that's just that goes back to how we compete with these
Yeah.
companies, and I think also irrigation. I think that a lot of companies of any size, I know you're real big on water management.
Yep.
I met your head irrigation guy when I was up in Santa Cruz. Had a great conversation. A lot of people lose work from lack of irrigation knowledge, whether they're too big to pay attention, whether they have a tech that wasn't the best, or other obvious reasons. I think that's why a lot of HOAs go out, or commercial properties go out to bid, and then pricing. You got to like your irrigation rate. You don't want it at the top. You don't want it at the bottom. So like we always, it makes me happy when I ask a manager how are we at with pricing, maintenance, irrigation enhancements, and if they said we were in the middle, I'm like, good. I like to be, the middle, a little bit up,
Yeah, yeah, mid upper. I think I agree.
mid upper.
You know, if you're at the very top, you're always going to be attacked. You're always going to have that board member or that property manager kind of bringing you up of like, hey, I mean, these are the most expensive guys. Are you sure they're giving you the most expensive quality and the value for that dollar? And I think there's plenty of times where you are the most expensive or we are the most expensive, and we can back that up. But I agree. I think being in the middle is ideal. So when it when we're talking about connecting and building relationships, and for those listeners out there who are working on this part of their business, they're working on that retention side. How do you go about establishing relationships or establishing a connection with someone quickly during a job walk, especially when there's other landscapers there? Is there any secret sauce or tactics that you employ, or is it kind of just like you're being yourself and that's just kind of how it is?
Try to be myself. I try to be humble, and I try to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think honesty has been big for me, and also being present. So if you're in a job walk and you're looking at your phone on Instagram or you're taking phone calls, like you can shut your phone off for 20 minutes. So I think that's it. And also asking questions, being engaged. Why is this area wet? What's their budget for enhancements? Those sort of things. But when you remove yourself from the bid walk, and we're talking about relationships, it always kind of goes back to connecting on a personal level. Like any sales coach is probably going to tell you, get to know Justin. What's Justin into? What's Justin do on the weekends? What's his wife's name? What's his dad doing? Is his dad still part of the company? You want to,
Yep.
because that's going to make Justin feel good, right? That someone's inquiring. Everyone wants to be able to talk about themselves in some sort of way, right? And feel that the listener is actually listening. So I try to just build these relationships, and that's been really good for me as an account manager up until an owner. And I've had some unfortunate times in my life as since I've been an owner, and I've seen those clients email me, send me cards, send me gift cards, things that would blow your mind. And it's because, we care about each other. It's not just about business. And I've always been like that with my employees too. I trained myself early on to learn Spanish and learn their culture, the Hispanic culture, Mexican specific. And those guys' eyes light up when I come in and I just start talking to them about their weekend and their kids and their wives, and they're like, wow, So just getting down to the human personal level of how are you today? What's going on in your life? And I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. I what I'm hearing through all of that is this authenticity of just being honest, being yourself, not trying to be some fake, salesperson that you think everybody wants to see or wants to hear from. I think that's where people majorly go wrong is they try to take on this like Andy Elliott type persona and like we got to sell, we got to close, and they employ these tactics. And look, the people we're working with deal with, I mean, they deal with this all day long. They don't want that anymore. They want genuine, authentic human connections. And I think when people, like you said, reach back out to you when you're struggling or you're going through something personally or professionally, I think that's the best indicator to know that you've built relationships beyond just transacting landscape services for some type of dollar. It's way beyond and deeper than that. And you've worked at the big companies. I mean, at scale, that's really hard to do. It's almost impossible to do that as a national company, to have that type of connection with your clients. At
It's
least the
possible though.
majority of them.
I remember early on when I was working for ValueCrest, we had a job, Biogen IDEC, which is now Illumina, which is a
Mm,
big pharmaceutical company.
yep.
And, you take what I just said about the personal relationship aside, let's talk about the job. And that specific job, what I try to do today is I try to make the property manager's life easier and their job easier. So we're identifying things on the property that aren't even landscape specific, right? Like, hey, you got a
Okay.
sign that fell over. Some car just drove over your front lawn or whatever it is. And making their job easier and kind of being ahead of the game. And then when I was the account manager at that property, we received, or I specifically received awards for being top vendor, right? And this is like
Wow.
a campus that Valuecrest actually built. And it had, I mean, it was probably over 10 acres. Think about how many vendors they have for this massive building. And it was really cool to get the reward. I forget what it was called, but to go up there and get rewarded as being a solid vendor. And they had a grading system. I think it was quarterly, where they give you like a scorecard, like, hey, Justin, like, you're doing good this and this, but like you really need to step up your quality inspections, your irrigation. So they were like scoring us.
And that was the
And
vendor, the client doing that, should I say?
that was the client doing that. And when I got that reward, I was like in my 20s. And I don't know if you know who Dave Hansen is, but I heard from Dave
Yep.
Hansen, who's a vice president at Valuecrest at the time, and some of the Pam Stark, some of the really big players at Valuecrest, like wrote me specifically and ended up coming down and wanted to tour the job and kind of use it as a showcase. But it just kind of went back to having that passion, the passion about the quality, the horticulture side of things, but also building that relationship.
Well, it goes to show. I mean, this isn't something that you didn't just put on the business owner hat and say like, "Oh, this is me now." It shows that this has been your personality, your authentic behavior through your life, and probably a lot going back to how you grew up and being able to honestly like talking with those trade professionals when you were still in school and getting that insight of how they operate in the right way has led you
And
to
I
where
think
you
that was
are today.
huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was huge. And back on that, I don't think you can stop that, right? Like back then
Yeah.
I was talking to these like kind of rough landscapers or electricians and like kind of learning what they do in the trades. But then like I guess it was probably 2 years ago or maybe a year and a half ago. I thought early on, maybe the first 5 years, I was like, I can do this all by myself. I remember when I met you, we had this conversation. You're like, man, I've had all these coaches and done this and that. And I guess I had a little different approach. Like, I can just do this solo. We'll see how long. Well, eventually led to a little bit of burnout, right? Like, you can't just grow this big company and not have any support. So I didn't do the coaching thing, but I started kind of going back to my roots and cold calling people. And that
Okay.
year, I reached out to you,
Yep.
and then I reached out to a friend of mine, Tom Hevelin, and I was like, both of you guys asked kind of the same thing. Tell me a little bit about National Landscape Association, like NALP, right? And like, I'm thinking about joining that. And I did end up joining it. And when I joined it, I started reading all their newsletters and stuff. And I came across names of two other gentlemen that are very successful high up in this industry. And they had written articles about NALP wrote articles about them. And I read in those articles that those guys said things like, anyone can call me anytime. I'm like, perfect. So I'm like, I have no problem doing that. No shame, right? So I cold called both of those guys. And when I did, they said, let's have a call. And I usually start the call like, man, Justin, it's really cool to see what you did with K&D. And then they're like, tell me about you. Tell me about
Yep.
Urban. Kind of what I learned from those guys. And I don't know if you've ever felt this way, but it's like they're like they just pause like after I give them like the story of like day one, the struggle to today, and they're like you should be proud of that.
Hmm.
And like I think as a business owner, and I think you and I like kind of have like the same work ethic, and we have goals, and we're constantly pushing to do better. And sometimes you forget to pat yourself on the back, right? And
Yeah,
these guys were two guys that are very successful, run big companies. They were both just like, you should really be happy and proud of yourself. And I kind of, wow, like coming from them. And I think sometimes in life you need that reassurance. Maybe at least I'm wired that way. So it was really cool to hear that. And then I kind of looked at everything I did and I've done, and I'm like, wow, it is, it's impressive and it's not easy. And it's cool to see people observe that and recognize that.
it is, and it feels validating. Like
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know, to hear
Yeah.
it from those people, and you and I have. I think it goes to show like we've been able to talk to a lot of the same people and look up to a lot of the same people and get advice from those industry legends who have pioneered and paved the way for where we are today. To hear it from them is just a different level of validation than your employees, your clients, or anyone in your circle. It's like we put these people on a pedestal, and when we hear that from them, it just has so much meaning and so much value. Which, I mean, maybe there's something to that of like, maybe we need to value our own opinion more, but it's that entrepreneur, that hustle mindset where you're just like, nothing's ever good enough. And by the time you get to where you were going, you've already set three new big goals. So you never really arrive.
Well, we know you have.
I
We know
know.
that you're on top of that. I think gratitude too. My acupuncturist always tells me that. She's like, you need to
Yeah.
express gratitude every day. And I reflect a lot. And through all this chaos, I got a dog, and we walk 5 to 8 miles a day all over the hills of La Jolla and the coast. And that's kind of my time to reflect. And I try to do it, either after work or before anyone in the neighborhood's up. It's still dark out. But
Nice.
those are my times to kind of like reset, rethink what's the purpose for today, and keep pushing forward.
That's really good. I think giving ourselves that time to reflect is key. And with how busy things are in today's world, how fast things are moving, it's easy to just go from job to job to job to email to email and never really give yourself that moment to reflect. And I think walking is almost, for me, I would say is the best way to reflect because I'm doing enough to where my brain can kind of sit there and think, but I'm not doing so much where
Right.
like, I can't think at all. And it's just like it's a nice happy medium right there.
I agree. I mean, you can do the podcast, the music, and I do all that, but sometimes it's good to just take in what's around you, whether you're listening to the birds, the ocean, or your own thoughts, and just really kind of meditate, stay present. And I think it's good. I mean, you read about it. Walking's, you know, first form of
Yeah.
exercise, right? So mentally and physically, I think it does great things.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I want to chat a little bit about where we think the industry is going. You've been able to see some of the autonomous mowers coming out, and I know you pay attention to that
Wild.
stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
what's your thoughts right now on just some of those new technologies hitting our industry right now?
Well, I think that you have to stay on top of it. I think you have to, do your due diligence and research. I am not as good at it as you do. I know you're from what you tell me, you're throwing stuff at your team all the time, trial and error.
Oh
We
yeah,
try to take one thing on, digest that, do great at it, and then go
nice.
on to the next thing, right? We're kind of at that size. But it's wild. I mean, the robotic mowers and all that, I mean, it's crazy. We're doing some significant research with moving towards the battery operated equipment. I
Right,
think that's a big thing. AB 1572 in California specific is huge.
that's a turf
This,
removal.
it's a turf removal program. For those that don't know, California is in a long going drought, and they are by 2029 commercial properties HOAs, you have to remove your grass unless it's a park or you have reclaimed water is kind of the briefing on it.
Yep.
But there's struggles with that. I dealt with an HOA We're trying to present a budget for him. They're like, we're just going to put a bench in the grass and call it a park. I'm like, well, that's not the point, you know. Don't make me turn you in.
Yeah, it's not gonna
But yeah,
work.
that's not going to work. I mean, I think the industry in general, it's wild to see from where you and I started, and even like where your dad started. They probably didn't
Gosh,
even have
right.
cell phones when he started, right?
No.
Um, but it's cool, and I think that staying present and really knowing what's out there. We did the Weathermatic Partnership Program, I think,
Hmm.
as you know,
Yep.
and that has been really good to us. You know, shout out to Weathermatic.
Yeah, second that. We're on that same
You
program.
know, whether you're there or not to do the partnership program, there's still ways to get involved with, smart irrigation, whether it's Weathermatic or someone else. But, I have a guy that started with me since day one. He's my longest employee, and he started as a laborer, and I'm very proud of him. He's trained. We've moved him all the way up to head irrigator, and he runs the irrigation. He's got people under him, but 75 properties he's running all the
Wow.
irrigation on.
Yeah.
And just, these young, I mean, he's younger than, he's probably 10 years younger than me, maybe more, but those guys just, they're like sponges with the technology.
They are.
So when I can show this stuff to him, he loves it. So we got him a big iPad. We did the partnership program. So now he can go in the morning, he's looking at his alerts and, the inspection tool. It's just been really, really great and really helped us build our irrigation division. So, I think the industry is changing, but I think at the same time you can't forget about the basics, right? You have to be able to um, remember that
Landscape.
AI
Still got a
can't do
landscape.
everything, right? But I think there's a lot of changes, and I think going to all these conferences is awesome, because they talk about new things and what's up and coming, and go to the trade show room at Elevate. I'm sure
Oh yeah.
disruptors, you guys will probably be there. It's like it's crazy. There's all sorts of stuff going on. Even like the guys I met through you, Bob Yard.
Right.
We don't
Yeah.
need Bob Yard because we uh don't do a lot of that kind of work. But I've talked to those guys. They're great guys, but I'm like thinking about my days as an estimator at Valley Crest. If I would have had Bob Yard,
Yeah.
would have done my
It's
whole job for me.
it's great. Exactly. And it's like I think for people out there who may not be all in on technology, even though you aren't, that doesn't mean the people that work for you don't want more technology. And your irrigator is a great example of someone who's probably thriving in this technology enabled environment where maybe at a small, I would even say just a similar sized company, 3 to 5 million, they probably don't have those types of benefits and that technology. And so they're not going to get the best team members, or at least the team members that want to utilize technology. And so a lot of companies are just kind of, I don't want to say they're not going to evolve, but they're going to struggle in this post tech environment where everybody else is tech enabled, connected, moving fast, very efficient. For example, Bob Yard. I mean, what an estimator can do in a year versus today is going to be radically different. I mean, it's going to be 5x maybe what they could do because half or maybe 75% of their job is going to be done with an AI agent. And now they can just focus on
It's
selling
crazy.
and communicating.
Yeah,
It's
it's crazy. Even like
crazy.
the so I don't know if Kane, do you ever had it, but like you probably still do, maybe like a basic landscape designer, right? That
Yeah.
uses the program. Um we have one. We don't even, Landscape
With
Pro, I think it is. But those
Vectorworks.
those
Yeah.
job
A whole bunch of them.
those jobs are basically going to be eliminated, right? And it's very sad for those people. I would recommend them to move into like the sales side of it probably, but
Exactly.
like
Yep.
you can use ChatGPT to do some of these images that previously were a rendering done by a human. Um, they're not the best,
Right.
I've had some issues with them where I'm like, hey, remove that, object, and like I'll ask it 5 times and it, or
Yeah. It keeps moving it around and like moves it to the other side of the.
no, I said, yeah, I'm like eliminate, take it out, and but it still gets the message across. And now these property managers are aware of that. So I had a lady the other day, we're just walking the job and she's just like, yeah, just send me a rendering from ChatGPT. Like now that the managers know about it, it's almost
Right.
like expected
Totally.
If I'm going to go to a property, say a hotel, and give them an upgrade for color and to redo their pool area, they're trained now because they are up to date with technology. They're going to say, yeah, well, send the proposal back with a rendering,
Yep.
So it's almost like you better be on the forefront of that. And it's pretty cool.
It's
It's pretty
super
cool to see.
exciting. There's a podcast that just launched a couple weeks ago with Derek Cleland from Your Haven, and their whole deal is like they do the design for you, and they do it with a subscription rate. So you pay whatever, a couple $1,000 a month, and you get like 5 designs, and it's fully like details, the whole thing, 3D and 2D. So you're doing like a design's going to cost maybe $500, but it's full 3D video walkthrough, and we're talking more, maybe a backyard or a full, HOA
Cool, Reno.
renovation. But what's cool is for us at K&D, we're partnered with Derek and his team at Your Haven, and we have a disruptor partnership too. If anyone's interested in checking them out, but basically our designers aren't doing a lot of clicking and dragging and creating on the screen. They're building out design briefs using AI and voice memos. Then they send that to Your Haven, and Your Haven basically creates a 3D rendering in a few days, sends that back for comment. And our designers they're still designing. They're still creating the vision, and they're bridging the vision from the client to ultimately what's going to be installed. But instead of having to sit in front of a computer for typically 4 to 6 hours a day, like you said, they're out meeting with clients for 4 to 6 hours a day. And then only 2 or 3 hours a day are they spending directly communicating with I guess I would call it like almost our outsourced design team. And we have access to over 50 designers with Derek's team. So we're never held back on how much we can do. If we get a huge amount of clients that are like, we all need designs at the same time and AB 1572 and all this stuff, well, we can increase our design output. I mean, we can 10x it overnight because we have access to this huge team that he's built. So it's kind of like this next evolution of where
Cool.
design
It
is
should increase
going.
sales, right?
It is increasing. Yeah, our
Yeah.
sales for Q3 were all at an all-time record, like 80%. I don't want to say numbers. I'll leave that to the imagination, but I'll just say we set a record for sales in Q3 of 2025 on our design build team, and a lot of that had to do with our design process because it happens so much faster now.
That's awesome. Well, congrats on that.
Yeah, you got to be careful though, because those AI designs, you start throwing renderings out, and the clients are going to expect it to look like that when you get done. So be
Yeah.
careful what you put out there.
Maybe have your install team take a look pre send out.
That's a probably good idea. Just like how we should probably have our maintenance teams look at our hours when we budget properties.
Yeah.
They never have
Yeah.
enough hours.
Send your best foreman to ride around with Tony when he's bidding a job.
Oh man. Well, Andrew, it's been a super fun conversation, man. I really enjoyed you coming on and sharing your story, sharing so much of what got you here. Every episode we end with a trade secret. So I wanted to get yours and see what you had for our guest today.
Well, I guess kind of referencing the technology, with AI and technology, I think you can't forget about HI, human interaction, right?
I
So
like that.
you have you can't be afraid to build relationships and with your clients and your team, and don't be afraid to get personal at times because that can strengthen those relationships. But simultaneously, trades involves the senses, right? So you have to get out to your properties. You have to see your properties. Sometimes you have to touch, smell, feel, you know, at this point, AI has not been able to send a robot to do a client walk to inspect for quality, or a robot to build a relationship like you and I have, right? So, keep that human interaction, but at the same time, you have to be on the forefront of technology. So I think, if you can find that balance, I think you'll be very successful. But I think you kind of have to be back to the basics. And horticulture is very hands-on, speaking landscape specific. And if you kind of lack that or you forget about that, I think you could also be kind of left behind.
Yeah. Dang, I like that. HI, human interaction. Don't forget that.
Don't forget that.
Man. All right. Great talk today, Andrew. I'll
Cool.
see you at Elevate, my man. And thanks so
Awesome.
much for sharing everything and being on the podcast today.
All right, Justin, good to see you. Take care.
You too, man. See ya.
Okay, bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Trades Talk, where the next generation of disruptors comes to raise the bar. If you got value from today's episode, share it with someone in the trades who's ready to level up. For more tools, insights, and community, follow host Justin White and join the movement at jwhitegroup.com.